The letter, trembling in Adelaide Graham's hands, promised a new life in Utah Territory. But as the stagecoach rattled toward Monticello in the summer of 1884, all she felt was the gnawing terror of leaving everything familiar behind for a man whose face she had seen only once in a fading photograph. Adelaide pressed her forehead against the dusty window, watching the landscape transform from green valleys to red rock formations that seemed to rise from the earth like ancient sentinels. She was 22 years old, orphaned 3 months ago when consumption took her last living relative, her Aunt Margaret, and left alone in Philadelphia with nothing but debts and the unwanted attention of her aunt's landlord. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like Providence at the time. A rancher in Utah Territory seeking a wife, someone to share his life and help build something lasting in the wild frontier. Now, with each mile that separated her from everything she had ever known, Adelaide wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The other passengers in the stagecoach paid her little mind. An older couple dozed against each other, their faces weathered by sun and hardship. A traveling salesman with a waxed mustache read a dime novel, occasionally glancing out the window with bored eyes. Adelaide clutched her carpetbag closer, feeling the weight of her few possessions, her entire life reduced to what could fit in a single bag. She pulled out the letter again, though she had memorized every word. The handwriting was neat, almost careful, and the words had been kind without being overly familiar. Connor Vaughn had written about his ranch, about the cattle he raised, about the small but growing town of Monticello where honest people were building lives worth living. He had been honest about the hardships too, the isolation, the harsh winters, the demanding work. He had not promised luxury or ease, only a partnership and the chance to build something together. Adelaide had appreciated that honesty, even as it frightened her. The stagecoach hit a rut, jolting everyone awake. The older woman smiled at Adelaide sympathetically. "First time out west, dear." Adelaide nodded, managing a weak smile in return. "I'm meeting my intended in Monticello." "Mail order bride," the woman said, not unkindly. "Took courage to come all this way. My own daughter did the same last year, went to Colorado. She's happy now, has a baby on the way." The words should have been comforting, but Adelaide only felt the fear tighten around her chest. What if Connor Vaughn was nothing like his letters? What if he was cruel or dishonest? What if she could not bear the isolation and the unfamiliar landscape? What if she failed at everything he needed from a wife? The unknown stretched before her like the endless red desert outside the window. 3 days of travel had left her exhausted and dusty, her traveling dress wrinkled beyond repair, her dark hair escaping its pins despite her best efforts. She tried to tidy herself as best she could, knowing they would arrive in Monticello within the hour. But the small mirror in her handbag only showed her own anxious green eyes staring back. When the stagecoach finally rolled into Monticello, Adelaide's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone must hear it. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings along a wide dirt street, with the spectacular red rocks rising in the distance like silent witnesses. The driver called out their arrival, and Adelaide gathered her belongings with shaking hands. She stepped down from the coach into the bright afternoon sunlight, momentarily blinded after the dim interior. When her eyes adjusted, she saw him immediately. Connor Vaughn stood beside a wagon, his hat in his hands, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He was taller than she had expected, broad-shouldered and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His photograph had not captured the quiet strength in his face or the genuine concern in his blue eyes as he approached her. Miss Graham. His voice was deep and gentle, nothing like the harsh tone she had feared. I'm Connor Vaughn, Mr. Vaughn. Adelaide's voice came out barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. It's good to meet you. He smiled then, and it transformed his face, made him look younger than his 28 years. The pleasure is mine. Though I imagine you're exhausted from your journey, I have the wagon ready. We can head to my ranch, or if you prefer. I've arranged a room at the boarding house in town where you can rest and freshen up first. Whatever makes you most comfortable. The kindness in his offer, the way he seemed to understand her apprehension, made Adelaide's eyes prick with unexpected tears. She blinked them back quickly. The boarding house would be welcome, thank you. Connor loaded her carpetbag into the wagon and helped her up onto the seat with a steadying hand that was warm and calloused. As they drove down the main street, he pointed out the various establishments. The general store, the church, the doctor's office, the small schoolhouse. It's not much compared to Philadelphia, I'm sure, but folks here are good people. My neighbor, Mary Patterson, is looking forward to meeting you. She lives about 5 miles from my place with her husband and their 3 children. She said to tell you that women are scarce enough out here that she's desperate for friendly company. Adelaide managed a small smile at that. I would like that very much. Connor glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. Miss Graham, I want you to know that you don't have to be afraid. I know this is all strange and new, and I'm a stranger to you despite our letters. But I meant what I wrote. I'm looking for a partner, someone to share this life with. Not a servant, not someone to order around, but a true partner. And if, after you've had some time here, you decide this isn't what you want, I'll pay for your passage back east. No questions asked, no hard feelings. The words should have relieved her, but instead, they made her feel worse. Connor Vaughn was being more than fair, more than kind, and she was sitting beside him trembling like a frightened rabbit. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. That's very generous of you, Mr. Vaughn. I appreciate your understanding. Connor, he said. Please, just Connor. Mr. Vaughn makes me sound like my father, and that's not a comparison I'm fond of. Something in his tone made Adelaide look at him more carefully. There was old pain there, carefully buried but not quite hidden. She understood that kind of pain. Then you must call me Adelaide. He smiled again, that warm expression that made her feel slightly less terrified. Adelaide, that's a beautiful name. The boarding house was run by a cheerful woman named Mrs. Henderson, who clucked over Adelaide like a mother hen, insisting she needed a hot bath and a proper meal before anything else. Connor agreed to return the next morning so Adelaide could see his ranch and they could talk more. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door of the boarding house. Adelaide, I know you're scared. I can see it in your eyes, and I don't blame you one bit. You've traveled across the country to marry a man you've never met, to live in a place you've never seen. That takes more courage than most folks will ever have. He turned his hat in his hands, choosing his words carefully. But I want you to know something. Whatever unknowns we face, whatever challenges come our way, we'll face them together. You won't be alone in this. I give you my word on that. After he left, Adelaide sat in the small but clean room Mrs. Henderson had shown her to, Connor's words echoing in her mind. The terror had not left her. The fear of the unknown still gripped her heart, but something else had joined it now. A small spark of hope, fragile as a candle flame in the wind, but there nonetheless. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the sun painting the red rocks in shades of orange and gold. Adelaide dressed in her best dress, a simple blue calico that was practical but becoming, and did her hair with more care than usual. When Connor arrived with the wagon, his face lit up at the sight of her, and Adelaide felt a flutter in her chest that was not entirely unpleasant. The ride to his ranch took nearly an hour, following a dirt road that wound through spectacular landscape. Connor pointed out landmarks, telling her about the area with obvious love for the land. "The winters can be harsh," he admitted, "but the rest of the year makes up for it. Spring brings wildflowers you wouldn't believe, and the summers are hot but beautiful. Fall is my favorite, though. The cottonwoods turn gold and the air gets crisp and clean." "How long have you been here?" Adelaide asked, genuinely curious now. "5 years. I came out from Kansas with just a horse and whatever I could carry. Worked for other ranchers at first, saved every penny, and finally bought my own land 3 years ago. It's not much yet, but it's mine, and I'm building something that will last." He glanced at her. "Something I hope to pass down to children someday, if I'm blessed enough to have them." Adelaide felt her cheeks warm at the implication. Children meant intimacy, a thought that both frightened and intrigued her. She had received the basic instruction from her aunt about marital duties, delivered in embarrassed whispers that had left her more confused than informed. But there had been something in Connor's tone when he spoke of children, a gentleness that suggested he would not be harsh or unkind. The ranch came into view as they crested a rise, and Adelaide caught her breath. It was not large or grand, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. A sturdy log house with a covered porch, a barn and several outbuildings, and corrals where horses and cattle grazed. Behind it all rose the red rocks, creating a backdrop that seemed almost unreal in its majesty. "It's not fancy," Connor said, and Adelaide could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "But it's solid. I built the house myself, made sure it would stand up to anything." "It's wonderful," Adelaide said honestly, and saw relief flood his face. He helped her down from the wagon and led her toward the house. Inside, everything was neat and clean if sparse. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end and simple but well-made furniture. A door led to what Adelaide assumed was a bedroom, and a ladder led to a loft above. "I sleep in the loft," Connor said quickly, following her gaze. "I thought you should have the bedroom for privacy. Until we're married, I mean. And even after, if you need time to adjust, I understand." Adelaide turned to face him, this man who was trying so hard to make her comfortable, to ease her fears. "Connor, why did you write for a mail-order bride? Surely there must be women in the territory who would have been interested." He was quiet for a moment, then gestured to the chairs by the fireplace. They sat, and Adelaide waited while he gathered his thoughts. "My father was a hard man," Connor finally said. "He believed in control, in bending people to his will. He treated my mother like property, and when I was old enough to understand, I swore I'd never be like him. When I came out here, I wanted to find someone who chose this life, who chose me, rather than someone who married me out of convenience or family pressure. Your letters, Adelaide, they showed me someone intelligent and honest, someone willing to take a chance on something unknown because the alternative was worse. That takes strength, and strength is what's needed out here." "I'm not strong," Adelaide whispered. "I'm terrified all the time." "Being scared doesn't mean you're not strong. It means you're human." Connor leaned forward, his eyes earnest. "Adelaide, I'm scared too. Scared I won't be a good husband, scared I'll fail at this ranch, scared I'll let you down. But we can be scared together, and maybe that makes it easier." For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, Adelaide felt something inside her unknot slightly. "How long until the wedding?" I spoke to Reverend Mills. "He can perform the ceremony whenever we're ready. Tomorrow, next week, next month. Whatever you need." Adelaide thought about her circumstances, about the fact that she had nowhere else to go, no family waiting, no home to return to. But more than that, she thought about the man sitting across from her, offering her time and understanding when he could have simply demanded she fulfill their agreement. 3 days, she said. That will give me time to prepare myself, but not so long that I lose my nerve entirely. Connor smiled. 3 days it is. Those 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Henderson and Mary Patterson, Connor's neighbor, took Adelaide under their wings with enthusiasm. Mary was a few years older than Adelaide, with a kind face and capable hands, and her enthusiasm for having another woman nearby was infectious. Together, they altered one of Adelaide's dresses to serve as a wedding dress, adding lace that Mary had been saving for something special. "Connor Vaughn is a good man," Mary told Adelaide as they sewed. "My husband speaks highly of him, says he's honest and hardworking. You could have done much worse." "I just wish I knew what to expect," Adelaide confessed. "Everything is so different here." Mary paused in her stitching. "Can I give you some advice? Stop trying to predict every unknown, every challenge. You'll drive yourself mad that way. Instead, take each day as it comes and trust that you're stronger than you think." The wedding took place on a Sunday morning in the small church, with most of the town in attendance. Adelaide wore her altered dress and carried wildflowers that Connor had picked that morning. As she walked down the short aisle, she saw him waiting at the front, and something in his expression, proud and tender and hopeful, steadied her racing heart. Reverend Mills kept the ceremony simple and sweet. When Connor took Adelaide's hand to slip the simple gold band on her finger, his hand was shaking slightly, and she realized he was just as nervous as she was. The knowledge was oddly comforting. "I promise to be a good husband to you," Connor said quietly, for her ears only. "To respect you and care for you, to face every unknown together." "And I promise to try to be brave," Adelaide whispered back. "To trust you and build this life with you." The kiss that sealed their vows was gentle and brief, but it sent warmth spreading through Adelaide's chest. This was her husband now, this kind man with calloused hands and patient eyes. The town had organized a small reception at the boarding house, with food and music and genuine celebration. Adelaide was overwhelmed by the warmth of these strangers who were now her neighbors and friends. Mary stayed close, introducing her to everyone, making sure she felt welcomed. Connor remained at her side, his hand occasionally finding the small of her back, a gesture that was protective without being possessive. As the sun began to set, Connor helped Adelaide into the wagon for the ride back to the ranch, their ranch now. Her trunk, which had arrived on the stagecoach earlier in the week, was already loaded in the back. Everything she owned in the world was in that trunk and the carpet bag at her feet. The ride was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Adelaide's nervousness had returned, thoughts of the wedding night filling her with apprehension. Connor seemed to sense her tension because he spoke softly without looking at her. "Adelaide, I know what's expected on a wedding night. But I also know you're exhausted and overwhelmed. There's no rush for any of that. We have the rest of our lives." Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by gratitude and something that might have been affection. "Thank you for understanding." He finally looked at her, smiling slightly. "We're partners, remember? That means we figure things out together at a pace that works for both of us." At the ranch, Connor helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. He had clearly prepared for her arrival. The bedroom now contained not just his simple bed but a dresser he had made himself, with a mirror propped on top and a basin for washing. Wildflowers stood in a jar on the windowsill. "I'll give you privacy to change and settle in," Connor said. "I'll be out on the porch if you need anything." Adelaide unpacked a few necessities and changed into her nightgown and robe, her hands shaking slightly. When she emerged, she found Connor sitting on the porch steps, looking out at the stars that filled the sky with impossible brightness. She had never seen so many stars in Philadelphia. "It's beautiful," she said softly, sitting beside him. "One of my favorite things about living out here. The night sky makes you feel small, but in a good way. Like your problems aren't quite as big as they seem." He glanced at her. "Are you comfortable? Is there anything you need?" "I'm fine, thank you. The room is lovely. The flowers were a nice touch." Connor ducked his head, looking pleased and embarrassed. "I wanted you to feel welcome." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the distant cry of a coyote, the rustle of wind through the grass. Adelaide felt the tension slowly leaving her shoulders. This was not what she had expected from her wedding night, sitting on a porch talking to her husband like a friend, but it felt right somehow. "Tell me about your family," Connor said. "Your letters mentioned your aunt, but not much else." Adelaide pulled her robe tighter. "My parents died when I was 14. Yellow fever took them both within days of each other. My Aunt Margaret took me in, but she was not a warm woman. Duty-bound, I suppose you'd say. When she died 3 months ago, I was left with nothing but her debts." Her landlord made it clear he expected payment of a different sort. She shuddered at the memory. "That's when I saw your advertisement. It seemed like fate." Connor's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry you went through that, but I'm grateful you answered my letter, selfish as that might be." "What about you? You mentioned your father was difficult." "That's putting it mildly." Connor's voice hardened. "He was a tyrant who ruled our home with his fists and his temper. My mother died when I was 16, and I've always believed she gave up because living with him was too hard. I left home the day I turned 18 and never looked back. Worked my way west, doing whatever jobs I could find, until I had enough saved to start my own place." Adelaide reached out hesitantly and placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry. No child should have to endure that." Connor looked down at their joined hands, then turned his palm up to hold hers properly. "We've both had our share of hardship, but maybe that means we appreciate what we're building here even more." "What are we building?" Adelaide asked softly. "A home. A real home where there's kindness and respect. Where children, if we're blessed with them, will grow up knowing they're loved and valued. Where we face the unknowns together instead of alone." He met her eyes. "That's what I want." "What do you want, Adelaide?" She thought about it, really thought about it. "I want to belong somewhere. I want to matter to someone. I want to wake up without being afraid of what the day will bring." "You belong here," Connor said firmly. "You matter to me more than you know. And I promise you, every day we'll face whatever comes together. You don't have to be afraid alone anymore." Adelaide felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were not entirely tears of sadness. "How can you be so certain?" "Because I choose to be. Because fear of the unknown can either paralyze us or push us forward, and I'd rather move forward with you than stand still by myself." She leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that felt natural despite how new everything was. Connor put his arm around her carefully, as if afraid she might break. They sat that way for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Adelaide felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Adelaide had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, so different from her city existence. Connor was patient, teaching her about the animals, about maintaining the house, about the 100 small tasks that made up their days. She proved to be a quick learner, and though she made mistakes, Connor never criticized, only showed her gently how to do things differently. Their physical relationship progressed slowly. Connor kept his word about not rushing her, sleeping in the loft and giving her space. But gradually, Adelaide found herself wanting more. The gentle kisses he gave her before heading to bed grew longer. She started finding excuses to touch him, to adjust his collar or brush dust from his shoulder. And she saw the way he looked at her, with hunger carefully controlled out of respect for her comfort. One night, 3 weeks after their wedding, Adelaide climbed the ladder to the loft before Connor had settled in. He looked up in surprise from where he sat on the narrow bed. "Adelaide." "Is something wrong?" "No," she said softly. "I just thought we're married, and I think I'm ready for us to truly be married." Connor stood slowly, his eyes searching her face. "Are you certain?" "There's no rush, I meant what I said. I'm certain." And she was. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed now by trust, and by the growing affection she felt for this good man who had kept every promise he made. Connor descended the ladder and took her hand, leading her to the bedroom. What followed was awkward at times, both of them uncertain despite their best intentions, but it was also tender and sweet. Connor was patient and gentle, constantly checking that she was all right, and Adelaide found herself responding to his touch in ways that surprised her. When it was over, they lay tangled together, and Adelaide felt tears on her cheeks again. "Did I hurt you?" Connor asked, immediately concerned. "No," Adelaide assured him. "I'm just happy. I didn't expect to be happy." He pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. "I didn't either, if I'm being honest, but I am so very happy." After that night, their connection deepened. Connor moved his things to the bedroom, and they fell into the comfortable intimacy of a true married couple. Adelaide found herself looking forward to the end of each day, when Connor would come in from the ranch work and sweep her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly before even washing up for dinner. The work was hard, harder than anything Adelaide had done in Philadelphia, but she found satisfaction in it. She learned to milk the cow, to tend the vegetable garden Connor had started, to preserve food for the winter months. Mary Patterson visited regularly, bringing her children, and the friendship between the two women grew strong. Mary's husband, James, and Connor often helped each other with larger ranch tasks, and the two families began to feel like the extended family neither Adelaide nor Connor had ever really had. Autumn arrived, painting the landscape in golds and reds, just as Connor had promised. Adelaide stood on the porch one October morning, watching the sunrise paint the red rocks, and realized she could no longer remember why she had been so terrified. This life, this place, this man had become home in a way Philadelphia never was. Connor came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about? How much has changed? How different I feel now than I did stepping off that stage coach." "Good different or bad different?" Adelaide turned in his arms to face him. "Very good different. Connor, I think I'm falling in love with you." His face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "Thank God, because I fell in love with you weeks ago and have been dying to say it." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Adelaide melted into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she laughed with pure joy. "I love you," Connor said, cupping her face in his hands. "I love your courage and your kindness and the way you hum when you're cooking. I love how you've made this house a home. I love everything about you." "I love you too," Adelaide whispered. "I was so afraid of the unknown, but you were right. Facing it together makes all the difference." Winter came harsh and cold, but Adelaide found she did not mind. The house was warm and well built, and there was something cozy about being snowed in with Connor, reading by the fireplace in the evenings, talking and laughing and making love when the mood struck them. They played cards and told stories and planned for the spring. It was during one of those long winter evenings that Adelaide realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely, but when another month passed, she knew she had to tell Connor. She waited until after dinner, when they were sitting by the fire. Connor was whittling a piece of wood, something he did to keep his hands busy during the long, dark evenings. Adelaide watched him for a moment, memorizing the piece on his face, knowing what she was about to say would change everything. "Connor, I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, hearing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" "I think I'm going to have a baby." Connor went very still. The piece of wood dropped from his fingers. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, but all the signs are there." He was across the room in an instant, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Adelaide, that's wonderful." "That's the most wonderful news." He pulled back to look at her. "Are you happy about it? I know we hadn't discussed timing." "I'm happy," Adelaide said, and realized it was true. "I'm scared too. Childbirth is dangerous, and I don't know what kind of mother I'll be, but I'm happy." "You'll be an amazing mother," Connor said firmly. "And Dr. Thatcher is good at what he does. We'll make sure you have the best care." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby." Adelaide covered his hand with hers. "Our baby." The pregnancy progressed well, though Adelaide suffered from sickness in the early months that left her exhausted and miserable. Connor was attentive and patient, taking over more of the household tasks without complaint, bringing her weak tea and crackers in the morning, holding her hair back when she was sick. Mary Patterson visited frequently, sharing advice and reassurance from her own 3 pregnancies. As Adelaide's belly grew, so did Connor's protectiveness. He tried to forbid her from doing any heavy work, which led to their first real argument. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Adelaide said, exasperated. "Women have been having babies and working for thousands of years." "But you're my wife, and I want to take care of you," Connor argued. "You can take care of me without treating me like an invalid. I need to feel useful, Connor. I need to feel like I'm still contributing." They reached a compromise where Adelaide would continue with lighter tasks, but leave the heavy work to Connor. It was the first of many small negotiations that made up married life, learning to balance 2 people's needs and wants into something that worked for both of them. Spring arrived with wildflowers just as Connor had promised, and Adelaide's belly had grown round and full. The baby was active, kicking and rolling, and Connor loved to place his hands on her stomach and feel the movements. Sometimes at night, he would talk to the baby, telling stories about the ranch and making promises about the life they would have. "I promise to always protect you," Connor said one night, his lips close to Adelaide's belly. "To teach you everything I know. To let you make your own mistakes but catch you when I can. To love you the way I love your mother, completely and forever." Adelaide ran her fingers through his hair, her heart full to bursting. This man, this wonderful man who had promised to face every unknown with her, was going to be a father. Their child would grow up knowing security and love, something neither Adelaide nor Connor had fully experienced in their own childhoods. When Adelaide's pains started on a warm May morning, Connor immediately rode for Dr. Thatcher and Mary Patterson. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Connor stayed by her side the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand until his bones ached, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. "I can't do this," Adelaide gasped at one point, exhausted beyond measure. "Yes, you can," Connor said firmly. "You're the strongest person I know. You crossed a continent to start a new life. You learned to live in a place completely foreign to you. You can do this, Adelaide. I know you can." When the baby finally came, a loud, healthy boy with a full head of dark hair, Adelaide wept with relief and joy. Dr. Thatcher placed the baby in her arms, and Adelaide looked down at the red, squalling face with wonder. "He's perfect," she whispered. Connor, who had tears streaming down his face, leaned over to kiss both Adelaide and the baby. "He really is. You did so well, Adelaide. I'm in awe of you." They named him Thomas Connor Vaughn, and he transformed their lives completely. Connor proved to be a natural father, patient and loving, happy to walk the floor with a crying baby in the middle of the night, to change diapers without complaint, to sing silly songs that made Thomas smile. Adelaide, despite her fears about motherhood, found that love made up for inexperience. She learned quickly, guided by instinct and Mary's advice, and she marveled daily at the tiny person they had created. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Connor expanded the herd, built new outbuildings, hired a young man named Peter to help with the heavier work. The extra help meant Connor had more time to spend with Adelaide and Thomas, and those were the hours he treasured most. Coming in from the fields to find Adelaide nursing their son, the afternoon light streaming through the window, filled him with a contentment he had never imagined possible. Thomas was 2 when Adelaide became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because Adelaide knew what to expect. Connor was no less attentive, but he had learned not to hover quite so much, understanding that Adelaide needed to feel capable and strong. Their daughter, Emma Grace Vaughn, arrived on a snowy December evening, quick and relatively easy compared to Thomas's birth. She was tiny and delicate, with Connor's blue eyes and Adelaide's dark hair, and Connor fell completely in love the moment he held her. "2 babies," he said, wonder in his voice as he looked from Emma to Thomas, who was being held by Mary and peering curiously at his new sister. "We have 2 babies." "We certainly do," Adelaide said, tired but happy. "Our family is growing." The years that followed were busy and full. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, asking endless questions and learning about the ranch. Emma was quieter, more thoughtful, content to sit with Adelaide and look at books or help in the garden. Connor and Adelaide navigated the challenges of parenthood together, supporting each other through sleepless nights, childhood illnesses, and the daily chaos of raising small children. The ranch became one of the most successful in the area, known for the quality of Connor's cattle and his fair dealing. Adelaide became a valued member of the community, organizing church socials, helping new mothers, and teaching reading to children in her home during the winter months. Together, they had built exactly what Connor had envisioned that first night on the porch, a home filled with kindness and love, where their children were growing up secure and happy. One evening, when Thomas was 7 and Emma 5, Adelaide stood on the porch watching Connor teach Thomas to rope a fence post. Emma sat beside her, playing with a rag doll Adelaide had made. The sunset painted everything gold, and Adelaide felt the familiar swell of gratitude for this life they had built. Connor noticed her watching and waved, his smile bright across the distance. Thomas waved too, excited to show off his new skill. Adelaide waved back, thinking about the terrified woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 8 years ago. That woman had been so afraid of the unknown, so certain she was not strong enough for frontier life. But she had been wrong. She was strong enough because she had not faced it alone. Every unknown, every challenge, every fear, she and Connor had navigated together, just as he had promised that very first day. "We'll face every unknown together always." He had kept that promise every single day since. As the children grew older, new unknowns presented themselves. Thomas wanted to go to school in town, which meant a long ride each day. Emma developed a fascination with medicine after Dr. Thatcher set her broken arm when she fell from a tree, and she began spending time at his office, learning whatever he would teach her. These were not the unknowns Adelaide had feared all those years ago, but they were still challenges that required navigation. Connor supported both children in their interests, even when it meant admitting that their lives might lead them away from the ranch eventually. "Our job is to give them roots and wings," he told Adelaide one night. "To teach them everything we can and then trust them to make their own choices." It was harder for Adelaide, who wanted to keep her babies close and safe forever, but she recognized the wisdom in Connor's words. So she helped Thomas with his schoolwork, listening as he read aloud and praised his progress. She encouraged Emma's medical interests, even buying her books about anatomy and medicine from the catalog. Their children were becoming their own people, and as terrifying as that was, it was also beautiful to watch. When Adelaide was 32 and Connor 38, they welcomed their third and final child, a son they named Daniel James Vaughn. The pregnancy had been unplanned, coming 10 years after Emma's birth, but the baby was welcomed with joy by the whole family. Thomas, now 12, was proud to have a baby brother. Emma, at 10, treated the baby like a living doll, constantly wanting to hold him and help care for him. Connor, watching his expanded family, felt a peace he had not known was possible. This was what he had dreamed of when he had placed that advertisement all those years ago. Not just a wife, but a true partner. Not just children, but a family bound by love and respect. Not just a house, but a home. Adelaide recovered from Daniel's birth more slowly than the others, and there were days when she felt overwhelmed by the demands of a new baby, 2 active older children, and the endless work of the ranch. But Connor was always there, taking up the slack without complaint, reminding her that they were in this together. "Some days are harder than others," he told her one particularly difficult evening when Daniel had been crying for hours and nothing seemed to soothe him. "But we've weathered every storm so far. We'll weather this one too." And they did. Daniel eventually settled into a routine, the older children adjusted to having a baby in the house again, and life found a new rhythm. Adelaide looked back on those early months and marveled at how they had survived, but they always did. Together. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Thomas graduated from school and shocked them by announcing he wanted to go to university in Salt Lake City to study law. Connor and Adelaide struggled with the idea of their firstborn leaving, but they ultimately supported his decision, proud that their son had ambitions beyond the ranch. Emma continued her medical studies with Dr. Thatcher and eventually went to Denver to attend medical college, one of the few schools that accepted women students. Connor worried constantly about his daughter so far from home, but Adelaide reminded him that Emma had the same strength and courage that had brought Adelaide herself across the country all those years ago. Daniel, their surprise baby, proved to have a love for the land that matched Connor's own. He was happiest on horseback, working with the cattle, and Connor knew that Daniel would be the one to carry on the ranch when the time came. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Connor took Adelaide back to Monticello, to the boarding house where she had stayed that first night. Mrs. Henderson had long since passed, but the building remained, now run by her daughter. They stood outside, holding hands, remembering. "You ever regret it?" Connor asked. "Answering that advertisement, coming all this way to marry a stranger?" Adelaide looked at him, this man she loved more deeply than she had thought possible to love anyone. His hair was touched with gray now, and lines creased his face from years of sun and laughter, but his eyes were still the same, kind and steady and true. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "You gave me everything I was searching for, Connor. A home, a family, a purpose. Love. You took a terrified woman and showed her she was stronger than she knew." Connor pulled her close, kissing her there on the street, not caring who saw. You were always strong, Adelaide. You just needed someone to believe in you until you could believe in yourself. They walked to the church where they had married and sat in the quiet sanctuary, hands joined. 20 years of marriage, 3 children, countless challenges overcome, and countless joys celebrated. They had built something lasting, something real, something worth every unknown they had faced. "Thank you for finding me," Adelaide whispered. "For writing that advertisement, for being patient with my fears, for keeping every promise you made." "Thank you for being brave enough to answer," Connor replied. "For trusting me, for building this life with me, for giving me a family I never dreamed I deserved." They sat in comfortable silence, the same peaceful quiet that had marked their very first evening together on the porch. So much had changed since then, but the essential truth remained the same. They were partners, facing every unknown together, and they always would be. As they grew older, Connor and Adelaide watched with pride as their children built their own lives. Thomas became a successful lawyer in Salt Lake City and married a schoolteacher named Rebecca. They gave Connor and Adelaide their first grandchildren, twin girls named Rose and Lily. Emma graduated from medical college and returned to Utah Territory, setting up practice in a larger town about 50 miles from Monticello. She married a fellow doctor, and together they provided medical care to a wide area. Daniel married Sarah, the daughter of the Pattersons, bringing the two families even closer together. Daniel and Sarah took over the day-to-day running of the ranch, though Connor still helped out as much as his aging body allowed. Connor and Adelaide's house, which had seemed so large when it was just the two of them, now regularly overflowed with children and grandchildren visiting. Adelaide loved having everyone home, cooking huge meals and watching the grandchildren play in the same yard where their own children had grown up. Connor loved teaching his grandchildren about the ranch, passing on the knowledge he had accumulated over decades. On quiet evenings, after the visitors had gone home, Connor and Adelaide would sit on the porch just as they had done for nearly 40 years of marriage. Connor's hands were gnarled now with arthritis, and Adelaide's dark hair had turned silver, but they still held hands as they watched the stars come out. "You remember what you told me that first night?" Adelaide asked one evening. "About facing every unknown together." "I remember," Connor said. "Best promise I ever made." "You kept it," Adelaide said softly. "Every single day you kept it." Connor raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "It was never a hardship, my love. Facing the unknowns with you has been the greatest privilege of my life." Adelaide leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over decades of marriage. "I was so frightened that day I arrived. I could never have imagined this life, this happiness." "Fear of the unknown is natural," Connor said. "But we proved that together. Even the scariest unknowns can turn into the greatest blessings." They sat in peaceful silence as the stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had witnessed their first conversation, their first kiss, their first steps into a shared life. The ranch land stretched out around them, prosperous and well-maintained, a legacy they would pass on to Daniel and his children. Their other children were thriving in their chosen paths, healthy and happy and successful. They had grandchildren who loved them and would carry their memories forward. When Connor developed a persistent cough the winter he turned 72, Adelaide fussed over him relentlessly, making sure he stayed warm and rested. Emma came to examine him and prescribed rest and careful monitoring. The cough eventually cleared, but it reminded them both that their time was finite, that the unknowns they now faced included the ultimate unknown of death. "I'm not ready to lose you," Adelaide said one night, her voice breaking. Connor pulled her close. "You won't lose me." I'll always be with you and our children in this ranch, in every memory we've made. And when your time comes, I'll be waiting for you, ready to face the next unknown together." Adelaide cried against his chest, but she also understood. They had faced everything else together. They would face this too when the time came. But that time was not yet. Connor recovered his strength, and they enjoyed several more good years together. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, their grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The celebration was held at the ranch, with half the town attending, a testament to the life they had built and the respect they had earned. Connor made a speech, his voice still strong despite his years. 50 years ago, I wrote an advertisement for a mail-order bride. It was a gamble, a leap into the unknown. When Adelaide stepped off that stagecoach, I saw her fear, but I also saw her courage. Every day since, she has shown that same courage, facing every challenge, every unknown with grace and strength. Adelaide, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You took a lonely rancher and gave him a family, a home, and a love deeper than I ever imagined possible. Adelaide stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. And you took a frightened woman and showed her she was braver than she knew. You kept every promise you made, Connor Vaughn. You have been my partner, my love, my greatest blessing. These 50 years have been the best of my life. They cut the cake together, their hands joined on the knife, just as their hands had been joined through every joy and every sorrow for 50 years. Their children and grandchildren applauded, and Adelaide looked around at all these people who existed, because she had been brave enough to answer that advertisement, because Connor had been patient enough to let her find her courage. That night, after everyone had gone home, Connor and Adelaide sat on the porch one more time. They were old now, their bodies tired and worn, but their love had only deepened with time. "We did it," Connor said softly. "We built something that will last long after we're gone." "We did," Adelaide agreed. "And it all started because you promised we'd face every unknown together." "Best promise I ever made," Connor repeated, pulling her close. They sat under the stars, two people who had started as strangers and become so much more. They had faced every unknown together, every fear, every challenge, every joy. They had built a life, a family, a legacy of love that would endure for generations. And as they sat there in the peaceful darkness, surrounded by the land they had worked and the love they had built, they knew they would continue to face every unknown together, for however many days they had left and beyond. Connor passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Adelaide holding his hand. Though her heart broke at the loss, she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. She lived another 5 years, staying active and involved in the ranch and the community until the very end. When Adelaide's time came, she faced it without fear. Daniel was with her, holding her hand just as she had held Connor's. Her last words were about Connor, about how she could feel him waiting for her, ready to face the next unknown together. Daniel buried his mother next to his father on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the red rocks that had witnessed their entire life together. At the funeral, he spoke about his parents' love, about how they had faced every challenge as partners, about how their courage and commitment had created a family that spanned generations. Thomas and Emma came home for the funeral, bringing their children and grandchildren. The house was full again, just as Adelaide would have wanted, full of the family she and Connor had created. They shared stories and memories, laughing and crying, celebrating a love that had endured for more than 50 years. Years later, when Daniel's own grandchildren asked about their great-grandparents, he would take them to the hill where Connor and Adelaide were buried. He would tell them the story of how their great-grandmother had traveled across the country to marry a stranger, how she had been terrified of the unknown, and how their great-grandfather had promised they would face every unknown together. And did they? The children would ask. They did, Daniel would say. Every single day of their lives they kept that promise, and that's why we're all here today, because they were brave enough to face the unknown together. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, a living testament to the courage of two people who had started as strangers and built something that would last forever. And on quiet evenings when the stars came out over the red rocks of Utah Territory, those who knew the story liked to imagine Connor and Adelaide sitting together on some celestial porch, holding hands and facing whatever unknowns eternity held, together always, just as they had promised.